The Huns were a group of Eurasian nomads appearing from east of the Volga, who migrated further into Western Europe around 370 and built up an enormous empire there. Their main military techniques were mounted archery and javelin throwing. They were in the process of developing settlements before their arrival in Western Europe, yet the Huns were a society of pastoral warriors whose primary form of nourishment was meat and milk, products of their herds. The origin and language of the Huns has been the subject of debate for centuries. According to some theories, their leaders at least may have spoken a Turkic language, perhaps closest to the modern Chuvash language. According to the Encyclopedia of European Peoples, the Huns, especially those who migrated to the west, may have been a combination of Central Asian Turkic, Mongolic, and Ugric stocks. Attila's father Munzuk was the brother of kings Oktar and Ruga, who reigned jointly over the Hunnic Empire in the early 5th century. This form of diarchy was recurrent with the Huns, but historians are unsure whether it was institutionalized, merely customary, or an occasional occurrence. His family was from a noble lineage, but it is uncertain whether they constituted a royal dynasty. Attila's birth date is debated. Journalist Eric Deschott and writer Hermann Schreiber have proposed a date of 395. However, historian Yaroslav Lebedinsky and archaeologist Katalin Escher prefer an estimate between the 390s and the first decade of the 5th century. Several historians have proposed 406 as the date. Attila grew up in a rapidly changing world. His people were nomads who had only recently arrived in Europe. They crossed the Volga River during the 370s and annexed the territory of the Alans, then attacked the Gothic kingdom between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube. They were a very mobile people, whose mounted archers had acquired a reputation for invincibility, and the Germanic tribes seemed unable to withstand them. Vast populations fleeing the Huns moved from Germania into the Roman Empire in the west and south, and along the banks of the Rhine and Danube. In 376, the Goths crossed the Danube, initially submitting to the Romans, but soon rebelling against Emperor Valens, whom they killed in the Battle of Adrianople in 378. Large numbers of Vandals, Alans, Suebi, and Burgundians crossed the Rhine and invaded Roman Gaul on December 31st, 406, to escape the Huns. The Roman Empire had been split in half since 395 and was ruled by two distinct governments, one based in Ravenna in the west and the other in Constantinople in the east. The Roman emperors, both east and west, were generally from the Theodosian family in Attila's lifetime despite several power struggles. The Huns dominated a vast territory with nebulous borders determined by the will of a constellation of ethnically varied peoples. Some were assimilated to Hunnic nationality, whereas many retained their own identities and rulers, but acknowledged the suzerainty of the king of the Huns. The Huns were also the indirect source of many of the Romans' problems, driving various Germanic tribes into Roman territory, yet relations between the two empires were cordial. The Romans used the Huns as mercenaries against the Germans and even in their civil wars. Thus, the usurper Jonas was able to recruit thousands of Huns for his army against Valentinian III in 424. It was Aetius, later patrician of the West, who managed this operation. They exchanged ambassadors and hostages, the alliance lasting from 401 to 450 and permitting the Romans numerous military victories. The Huns considered the Romans to be paying them tribute, whereas the Romans preferred to view this as payment for services rendered. The Huns had become a great power by the time that Attila came of age during the reign of his uncle Ruga, to the point that Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, deplored the situation with these words: "They have become both masters and slaves of the Romans." The death of Rigela in 434 left the sons of his brother Munzuk, Attila and Bleda, in control of the united Hun tribes. At the time of the two brothers' accession, the Hun tribes were bargaining with Eastern Roman emperors' envoys for the return of several renegades who had taken refuge within the Eastern Roman Empire, possibly Hunnic nobles who disagreed with the brothers' assumption of leadership. The following year, Attila and Bleda met with the imperial legation at Margus, all seated on horseback in the Hunnic manner, and negotiated an advantageous treaty. The Romans agreed to return the fugitives, to open their markets to Hunnish traders, and to pay a ransom of 8 solidi for each Roman taken prisoner by the Huns. The Huns, satisfied with the treaty, decamped from the Roman Empire and returned to their home in the Great Hungarian Plain. Theodosius used this opportunity to strengthen the walls of Constantinople, building the city's first seawall, and to build up his border defenses along the Danube. The Huns remained out of Roman sight for the next few years while they invaded the Sassanid Empire. They were defeated in Armenia by the Sassanids, abandoned their invasion, and turned their attentions back to Europe. In 440, they reappeared in force on the borders of the Roman Empire, attacking the merchants at the market on the north bank of the Danube that had been established by the Treaty of 435. Crossing the Danube, they laid waste to the cities of Illyricum and forts on the river, including Viminatium. Their advance began at Margus, where they demanded that the Romans turn over a bishop who had retained property that Attila regarded as his. While the Romans discussed the bishop's fate, he slipped away secretly to the Huns and betrayed the city to them. While the Huns attacked city-states along the Danube, the Vandals led by Gaiseric captured the western Roman province of Africa and its capital of Carthage. The Romans stripped the Balkan area of forces, sending them to Sicily in order to mount an expedition against the Vandals in Africa. This left Attila and Bleda a clear path through Illyricum into the Balkans, which they invaded in 441. The Hunnish army sacked Margus and Viminatium, and then took Singidunum, Belgrade, and Sirmium. During 442, Theodosius recalled his troops from Sicily and ordered a large issue of new coins to finance operations against the Huns. He believed that he could defeat the Huns and refused the Hunnish king's demands. Attila responded with a campaign in 443. For the first time, his forces were equipped with battering rams and rolling siege towers, with which they successfully assaulted the military centers of Rashiara and Nisus and massacred the inhabitants. The Huns next took Serdica, Sofia, Philippopolis, Plovdiv, and Arcadiopolis, Lulbergaz. They encountered and destroyed a Roman army outside Constantinople but were stopped by the double walls of the eastern capital. They defeated a second army near Callipolis. Theodosius admitted defeat, sending the Magister Militum per Orientum Anatolius to negotiate peace terms. The terms were harsher than the previous treaty. Their demands were met for a time, and the Hun kings withdrew into the interior of their empire. Bleda died following the Huns' withdrawal from Byzantium, probably around 445. Attila then took the throne for himself, becoming the sole ruler of the Huns.